like to welcome everybody here this afternoon. Start with a quick introduction. My name's Joel Simmons. I'm the Manager of Student Conduct and Case Management, and work on the Thunder Bay campus in the Office of Student Affairs. Thank you everyone for joining today's presentation, Plagiarism and Academic Writing, Tips and Best Practices for Faculty Members and Instructors. Hopefully, Jill and I were just talking, hopefully that you are aware and you're kind of connected that this presentation is part of a larger initiative that Lakehead has been up to this week, which is Academic Integrity Awareness Week. This is the second year that Lakehead has participated in this week-long initiative to focus more intentionally on academic integrity issues and education and awareness. So this might be your first time hearing about it. Last year, and again, Jill and I were talking about this last year, we only had workshops and webinars for students. But based on feedback and just the interactions I had with faculty members and instructors, there was some desire for specific webinars related to challenges that and kind of hot topics that instructors are facing. So we wanted to build this into something a little bit bigger, better, and so we've added these a few events anyways this week for faculty members and instructors. You may have, I think I recognize some of you from a few of our other events, so it's great to see you joining us as well. If you haven't made it out to any of the events, that's okay too. Let me just pause for a quick second and do a quick plug for the two remaining events that we have planned for this week. Later on this afternoon, actually at 3 p.m., also related to the topic of writing, we have a short 30-minute webinar led by Abhi Rao. It's called Top 5 Tips for Top 5 Tips for Developing a Writing Rubric. So again, it's similar to this presentation, focused on the very practical. The top 5 tips for developing a writing rubric is a session that presents kind of 5 useful tips that is intended to help instructors rethink their writing rubrics and how they grade written assignments. And then lastly, last event of the week, we have the AIM course virtual tour and a Q&A time related to academic integrity matters, like that course that we have at Lakehead. That is tomorrow at noon, and that session is really designed for anyone who's completely unfamiliar with Lakehead's AIM course and just would like a guided tour through all the different features and how to actually use AIM with your students, how to kind of incorporate it into your courses that you're teaching. Okay, so enough advertising. Let's jump into today's session by starting with a little bit of a background. When it comes to academic integrity violations and the trends that we typically see at Lakehead and other institutions as well, I'll share this with instructors and faculty members that most of the violations that we typically see, as you probably guess, are related to some form of plagiarism. And with a little bit of a disclaimer here that that's typically what we saw pre-pandemic. The numbers have kind of shifted a little bit, and we're seeing some different academic misconduct come up now that we've gone online with online examinations and things like that. We had a whole session on that yesterday related to contract cheating. But yeah, normally most academic misconduct cases involve students failing to cite their sources and then getting flagged for plagiarism, or they relate to students struggling with their skills and inabilities to paraphrase or summarize. They just don't have those academic writing skills yet. And, again, they get flagged for plagiarizing. And then we do get, the odd, just blatant copying and pasting from Google. That does happen still at the university level, which I think some of us have probably experienced and are really surprised about. Sometimes we have students using essay mills, purchasing essays online. Situations where students just kind of acquire, an essay from a friend, and they just throw their name on it and submit it, resubmit it, and you kind of detect that because there's information from last year and it sort of flags them as suspicious. But these types of cases are quite rare. Like I said, most academic integrity misconduct involve minor academic writing failures and plagiarism. So last year during our Academic Integrity Awareness Week, we launched a community of practice called Academic Integrity. It's kind of a cute play off of academic integrity. I love stuff like this. especially when I get to design little, advertisements to promote it and market it. But it was not an original idea. It was borrowed from an initiative that came out of York University. So what we've been doing now is like this event, we've had, I think 5 or 6 gatherings now, various faculty members join, instructors, student affairs staff, and myself gather over a cup of tea. We talk about academic integrity issues. There's a lot of venting usually involved, of frustrations, but then we try to bring it back to, let's talk about emerging trends, patterns, common struggles that, we're all sort of facing, some frustrations that we have. And then we start talking about solutions, different things that we can actually do to address these emerging trends and patterns. So like I said, we've had about 6 gatherings so far since last November. And one of the outcomes of this group has been the development of some resources for other faculty who don't attend the academic integrity gatherings, which I'll just pause for a second and say, if you're here today and you're interested in joining that community practice, it's not like an exclusive group. You don't have to get invited or whatever. We will be promoting those now because it did start as an invite only. We started small, but if you're interested in it, I'll have my contact information later on. Just send me a quick email and let me know that you want to join. We would love to have more people, join with us. We're trying to get together at least, a few times each term and try to talk about relevant topics, looking at the student life cycle and sort of what you're experiencing at different times throughout the year. So there's another plug for our academic integrity group. So we developed these resources for faculty who haven't been able to attend. We figured that, we're talking about some solutions. Collectively, we're coming up with what we feel are best practices. And we're figuring really, let's share these on the Student Conduct webpage, on the Teaching Commons website, and try to just get the word out outside of the group to help others out at Lakehead, because it is nice to have something that's specific to our institution. Now, since our group does talk about academic writing and plagiarism a lot, that's, a lot of our conversations center around helping students develop these, academic writing skills and things like that. It just naturally made sense for us to make our first resource that we actually produced and put together as a group related to that subject. So that's what we did. And you see it on the screen here. This resource is really going to provide the backbone for today's presentation. This is not my area of expertise. I don't have an educational background. I'm not like an academic writing specialist. I'm the student conduct guy within student affairs. So I am really reliant on everything that the group has sort of collectively put together. So that's going to be the backbone for today's presentation. All the points that we'll be covering today are tips and pointers that your fellow faculty members feel are best practice when it comes to addressing issues of plagiarism in the classroom. So without further ado, let's dive in. I'm going to run through these 10 points quite quickly. If you happen to have any questions as we're going through, normally I just say, just unmute and shout it out, but I'll just say, please save those questions for the end of the presentation. I found, when we're going through material like this, it's often, you get an answer to your question in a point that's later on. So if we don't answer your question by the time we've gone through all 10 points, let's have a conversation at the end. And that way we can record this as well and share it with folks who aren't able to make it. And then, like I said, that conversation and question and interaction, we'll just sort of have off camera. Okay. So looking at top 10 points, let's just dive right in. First one, and some of these obviously are going to feel like they're really obvious, okay? But keeping in mind, this is for seasoned faculty members, but it's also for new contract lecturers. So people who are coming in who are teaching a lecture and they don't have a teaching background either, and just trying to put on the radar things that they should be considering. First point is talk about it. At the beginning of the course, make sure that you're talking about academic writing and plagiarism with your students. I think sometimes we fail our students because we just assume they really understand all of these concepts already, that they understand how to cite sources, that they understand how to paraphrase, and that high schools and their institutions before they come into Lakehead, that they've properly prepared them, and that's not the case. So one of the things that came up that was really neat from someone within our Indigenous Student Services, they were basically saying like, hey, what I found works well in my classroom is I start to use different analogies related to knowledge sharing. And within that particular area, she was saying, you're relating it to elders' teachings. And I was saying you kind of go broader than that too, and be like, hey, when someone like your parent or whatever, or an expert that you've been working alongside shares a tip or something that they've learned in their lifetime, it's important to acknowledge that elder's teaching. You would never claim it as your own. It's not kind of common practice. You'd always give credit back to the elder. So there's, I think, a whole bunch of different analogies that you can come up with that maybe are more relevant to your particular group of students. But I think it's important to explore that idea of what are different ways that I can help students understand knowledge sharing, because it might be a new concept, and sometimes even coming from different parts of the world, there's these different understandings of knowledge and ownership of knowledge and sharing of knowledge that we sometimes take for granted and assume that it makes sense to give credit where credit is due, but sometimes students just haven't even thought of that yet. Okay. Another thing that's important when you're talking about plagiarism and academic writing with your students is to show them specific examples of plagiarism from your course. Obviously, anonymously, you're not going to like bring out a student's name and shame them or anything like that, humiliate them, but just anonymously saying, here's something that happened last term, and you show an actual like tangible on the screen, black and white, here is the, text that was supposed to be paraphrased that borrowed too much of the exact same language, and it's not paraphrased enough. So I would actually count this as plagiarism. Or someone just copied and pasted, there's a quote, but they didn't actually put an in-text citation. Show those things to your students to say, these are the types of things that you don't want to do. And I think it's really important that we provide discipline-specific tips and pointers, because within the field of sciences, let's say scientific writing for a scientific journal is very different than someone writing an essay within a history program, for example. So provide discipline-specific tips and pointers. And then another thing when you're talking about this with students is just to make sure that you explain what will happen if students plagiarize. I mean, you don't want to like use fear as your primary tactic, but it is nice for students to know if this happens, there is this academic integrity investigation process and potential penalties that could occur. And then I think one of the big things too, when you're talking about like dialogue with students, is just really, as much as you can, encourage students to actually talk with you or the TA, because what we've actually found hearing back from students is that some students are just completely terrified to approach their professors with questions, and you might be like, me? I'm like totally approachable. I'm like really, personal with my students, not me, but I don't know. I know that you can only do so much, and that sort of nervousness might just be that student's personal, a personal barrier that they have, but whatever you can do to break down those barriers would be really helpful. Just to be like, hey, if all the stuff I just talked about with regards to plagiarism is completely confusing, here are my office hours, come and talk to me. I would love to speak more about this. Okay. Second point is, as much as you can, promote our support tools, because we do have a lot of supports related to this area. Okay, so ensure that students understand that they have access to many supports, and a lot of those support tools are all free. Direct students to the Student Success Center. They have, the ability for their advisors to actually meet one-on-one with students to help them with their note-taking skills, their studying skills, time management skills, and all of those, while maybe seem a little bit, disconnected from plagiarism and academic writing, they're not, because we all know that most of the time when students get into, hot water and start to just like copy and paste is when they haven't managed their time well, they don't know how to be organized, and the plagiarism is almost done by accident because they're just scrambling last minute to get something done. So setting an appointment with an academic advisor with the Student Success Center would be great. And then the academic support zone has, writing coaches that can actually sit down with students, again, one-on-one, go through the materials, help them with their academic writing skills, whether it's paraphrasing or summarizing. They'd be able to look at what they've produced before they submit it and give them some helpful, critical, comments and feedback. And then we also have, our library liaisons. So just folks within the library are really good with like specific citation, styles and what you're expecting to see with, APA versus MLA or whatever your citation style would be required in the classroom. There are, so like steering them to Lakehead specific supports are important. You can also, I know that there are other institutions that have great resources. We do openly direct people to the Purdue's OWL, their online writing lab, because it's got some great material. We just had a webinar yesterday on Zotero. So like the software for actually helping keep all of your resources, journal articles, things like organized, and then it pulls together bibliographies and reference cited pages and stuff a lot easier. So I know that we had one yesterday related to plagiarism, but there are ongoing webinars for Zotero into like November. I think there's 2 more. So encouraging students to check that out, because what we've actually heard, so yesterday, for example, I'll share this, is we had a lot of graduate students who are at that place where they're doing a lot of research. They recognize the importance of Zotero, but right across the board, most graduate students say, I wish I had known about Zotero when I was an undergrad student. So promote that with your, with first year, second year, third year students, or maybe, all the way up through, whatever the level is, to use Zotero. And then, so I've already kind of covered the, for students who really need extra help, maybe giving them even a direct, I reach out saying, hey, based on your paper and how much you appear to be struggling with your academic writing, I really strongly suggest that you go make an appointment through My Success with, with a writing coach. Point number 3 would be to clearly define your rules. And I've kind of got your italicized to draw some attention to that, because I think there is some slight differences in expectations from one instructor to another. So it's important that you are specific about the rules that you have established in your course. Make sure that these rules are clearly documented within the course syllabus. So you can, again, refer students back to that. So if there's any confusion, you can be like, well, it was right here. The course syllabus statement said, that you specifically relating to academic integrity and plagiarism. One of the things too you can do when you're talking about your rules, be sure to include specifics about even direct quotes, something like that. Because I know, some instructors would say, I will allow 4 direct quotes in a paper. And then if you go beyond that, I won't even read them. So, and again, this kind of will differ between courses, but if you got specific rules like that, when it comes to grading, make sure you communicate that ahead of time so they just know, okay, it's really only appropriate to use direct quotations sparingly, and I shouldn't have any more than 3 of them in my paper, right? And then you can consider also getting students to sign a plagiarism agreement or an honor pledge, kind of like the same type of thing, but something that, is like a, front page that you would have students submit with every assignment, every written assignment. So then it's, again, always putting it back on their radar. Before I click send and submit this paper to my instructor, I'm understanding, and now, okay, the plagiarism thing's coming up again. Did I properly cite my sources? Did I actually paraphrase enough? Am I confident that I'm not going to get flagged for plagiarism? But having that be like a cover page with every assignment is appropriate too, or maybe not as a cover page, but as somewhere in there. Maybe they put it as, in the appendix or something. Point number 4 would be just my, plug for the AIM course. While I know that it's not the silver bullet for solving all of our problems, I think if we try to get as many of our students through the Academic Integrity Matters course, it at least creates an awareness of, academic expectations and what academic integrity is. And then there's 8 modules. So it sort of looks at group work, it looks at editing, it looks at examinations and cheating and all of those things, but there is a whole module on the academic conversation and academic writing, which is helpful to kind of get some key concepts into students' minds early on. So while it's not mandatory for all of our incoming students, we have had a great uptake with this course. I think right now, we launched it last September, we have over 5,000 students who've gone through the program. So that's pretty good. So there are different ways that you can consider, working this into your course, sometimes you just require students to submit their AIM course completion certificate. There is an easier way to do that. If you go to the AIM website on the student conduct webpage, there's a way that you can actually pull up your class list and see a list of who's done it and who hasn't. And it's really, it's straightforward. Teaching Commons helped us set that up. Or you can sometimes even assign like a small grade, and obviously you can't do that once the course is started, but ahead of time, if you wanted to, in your course syllabus, assign like 1%, 2%, it's an easy grade and it encourages students to do it. Point number 5, and this kind of gets into definitely some agreement with our community practice that this is if you can do progressive assignments, it does really help. Identify students, lack of skills early on. So it's not just like a surprise at the end of the term where it's like, you just want that final paper submitted, but it hasn't been like, you haven't had them do a literature cited first, or a literature review first. You haven't sort of had them submit like the framework for what their paper is going to look like. So if you can, develop assignments that build progressively on each other into a larger project. You can even, I know that some instructors have started with like a small paraphrasing or writing assignment that allows students to make mistakes, and then you give feedback on those smaller assignments. So, rather than have first assignment be like a research paper, first assignment might be take these, passages and paraphrase them, and then students have some time to practice. That's actually there, if you have, time with your students, there is a academic writing and plagiarism workshop tomorrow that the academic support zone is doing. It's at 10 o'clock. It's open for all students to attend, but it starts to go through, there actually, even in the workshop, there's some, kind of interactive practice with paraphrasing specifically. Point number 6, clarify, excuse me, this has more to do with online tests and examinations. So make sure that you're clarifying expectations when it comes to online assessments. So if you're going to try to utilize, an open book style, which I think that, we look at like best practices. I think sometimes we get into challenges where you're like, okay, you have to write this exam, but I'm expecting you to not open your textbook, not look at your notes, not Google anything. That's where you start to have other problems, with use of unauthorized materials and things like that. So if you're going to go, hey, I don't care what you use, you can use everything you want. It's open book. Just be sure to clearly explain that, students still have to put their answers in their own words. And, when they're actually using information from their lecture notes, so they're reusing your words, or they're pulling stuff from their textbook, because if they don't put things in their own words, then it's going to be kind of plagiarism within an exam, which is sort of a new concept. We haven't really had to deal with that before, especially within the sciences. Often, there's a lot of like memorization of definitions, and the closer you get to that definition, like almost if you can repeat it back verbatim, you get full points. But now, if you're doing an online exam and you do that, well, it kind of looks suspicious. You probably copied it from the internet. So it's sort of this really tricky time that we're in. So again, before the exam or test, just say, if you are using other resources, you still have to go that extra step. Put things in your own words. I want to know that you understand the concepts, that you understand the definitions, that you've got a firm grasp on the course material. I don't want to know that Google knows those answers. I want to know that you know those answers. And then I guess, and to go a little bit further, well, no, I'll leave it at that. It's pretty straightforward. Point number 7, and this is where I have to be a little bit careful with how I phrase this, because, with plagiarism, there is some interpretation about, at what point is it just poor writing? Or sorry, at what point does poor writing cross that line into plagiarism? So you have to make up your mind as to what behavior sort of constitutes plagiarism and what behavior does not. Where is that line? And then do your best to articulate that line. It kind of goes back to point number 1, do your best to articulate that to your students. So, I would say if a student makes an attempt to paraphrase, they do their best, they cite their sources, they've actually got an in-text citation there, so they're not just trying to like pass it off as their own words or ideas. but you feel that they did a poor job, like it's just really crummy writing, then consider giving that student, a poor grade, deduct marks, rather than deeming it as plagiarism. However, if, and this is where, would be my interpretation anyways, is that if a student does fail to provide proper acknowledgement of their source, by definition, that they didn't even try to, acknowledge that it was from another source, and whether it's paraphrased or taken verbatim, and it's just embedded in their assignment, then that would be considered plagiarism and a breach of the academic integrity code, and would constitute, or would warrant investigation under the code. So point number 8, no matter whether you implement points 1 through 7, no matter how good a job that you do, I think it is helpful to expect that despite whatever preventative efforts you put into it, some students are still going to plagiarize, both unintentionally and intentionally. Especially in earlier years, students still need to work on those skills to become good academic writers. That takes time to develop. It doesn't just happen overnight. Students are still learning, and it's inevitable that they're going to make mistakes. So I feel like it's helpful if you expect to see plagiarism, you're not going to be as shocked or caught off guard by it, right? So you kind of just expect it. It's going to happen. Hopefully it's a small percentage of your students. You expect to see it. And then we're talking about expectations as well, and I mentioned this briefly before, I think it is helpful to just realize that students come with different cultural understandings of knowledge sharing and citations. So to expect that it might take them a little bit more time to have that light bulb come on in their mind to kind of something to click and go, oh, okay, I understand what it means now to give credit to someone else because I'm sharing this idea that's not my own. Don't assume that, not even just culturally, but I think even different institutions or different high schools, students are coming from different colleges, there are different levels of preparation that students get coming in. So just expect to see it. This is my play on words here. So the last 3 are going to be kind of like that. I forget what the term is within teaching, where you kind of have that same sound, repetition of words, but you have expect it, and now you have detect it. Okay, so plagiarism can sometimes be difficult to detect. So that our community of practice did come up with just some things to look for, some ways to actually detect plagiarism. And they would say, I guess there's 5 points that I would recommend. One would be look for sections of writing that seem obviously odd or out of place, right? So you kind of hear the student's voice. Usually, especially with first year students and things like that, it'll be some really poor writing. They're fumbling the words. It doesn't flow very well, and then all of a sudden you come to this beautiful, eloquent, perfectly phrased, couple of sentences, and you're like, that seems a bit out of place. The other thing you can look for are definitions and language that you did not use in class. Like it's just out there and you kind of recognize where it's coming from, but it doesn't fit sort of the material that you provided them with. The other thing you can look for are just like, wording and phrases that don't make sense. So we're talking about before, like things that seem out of place or odd, but I'm actually talking now about like jumbled up words. Like a sentence just doesn't even make sense at all. You can tell that it likely would be the student did their best, they copied and pasted, they tried to merge different sources and just fumble things around just so it looks like it's, so just maybe, if you did happen to Google it or run it through some sort of plagiarism detection software, it wouldn't pick up on it, but the sentence just doesn't make sense. Looking for a change in the writing voice. So similar to what I was saying before, it wouldn't necessarily, I'm not necessarily implying that it would be a phrase that's out of place or writing that's all of a sudden goes from being poor writing to good writing or good writing to poor writing, but even just all of a sudden like just the voice changes, and you would be the experts on this. You would be able to know, like, you can see the student's writing voice just shift or change. And then looking for assignments that do not match the actual instructions given. So you could be really specific with what you're looking for, and then a student didn't really even do the assignment at all. So it is possible that they might have just misunderstood, but what's maybe more likely is that they were actually looking for an essay online, or they got, contracted out to somebody else to write it for them who didn't quite, didn't have the actual instructions or something. So then all of a sudden you end up with an assignment that doesn't even meet the requirements of the assignment at all. And that's because likely the whole thing might have been plagiarized from someplace else. And they were really, going for a stretch just to hope that that assignment will meet the needs. So expect it, detect it, and then the last point I'll just say is report it. So, it is really important, while we do want to give our students an opportunity to learn from their mistakes, realizing that, they're still learning, they're still students. But if a student does plagiarize, and again, like I said, you have to clearly define what that is within your course, make sure that students understand that. But if they cross that line, it is important that you formally document the offense so that we have a record of it on file. I think one of the frustrations has come from, an instructor will file, form 1 with the student, begin an investigation, and they'll be like, really? You don't have anything in the student conduct database about a prior record for the student? And I'd be like, nope, like nobody's reported anything. And it could be that the student, is in their 2nd or 3rd year, they've been struggling all the way along, but everybody's just sort of been wanting to be nice. They've had these side conversations, they've tried to handle it informally, and then we just have no record of it at all. I think it is important, it doesn't mean that you have to give the student a 0 in the course. You can choose to still document it, give them a warning, even have them resubmit the assignment with maybe a reduced mark or something like that. But it is important to go through that whole student code of conduct, academic integrity investigation process. And we've tried to streamline it as much as possible, make it as easy as you can, or as easy as we can on you, with the forms that are being templates to fill out. We've now got videos to sort of walk you through step by step. But one of the things we were talking about yesterday in our CHEG webinar was just if we don't report these cases and and students get away with it, it has a shift on their attitude towards plagiarism. They start to think that it's okay because there's no consequence. And students talk as well. So if student A says to student B, yeah, I just went to such and such a website, I grabbed my material, I threw it in there, I plagiarized, I even got caught, and I just had to resubmit it. So, and it didn't get recorded with the student in the student conduct database. So they're like, okay, well, there's an opportunity to cheat, and then so that has an adjustment on the attitudes and perceptions of plagiarism within our student population, which we don't want to see. So yesterday I made a reference to this paper that I was influenced by, which talks more about the fraud triangle. It was a study that was on what causes people to perform fraud, and there was a loose connection with academic integrity violations and things like that. This paper was referenced by someone in the field of student conduct and academic integrity. So in that fraud triangle, I don't have a slide for it, unfortunately, but there is what causes a student to cheat or to plagiarize, and it would be pressure, opportunity, and attitude. So obviously, students are under a lot of pressure, and there's only so much we can do about that. So there's not a whole lot we can really maybe decrease pressure. But if we're looking at opportunity and attitude, if we do report cases of plagiarism, it decreases the opportunities that students have to be dishonest and to to kind of cut corners. And then attitude, the more we report cases, the more we talk about it, the more we make discussing academic writing and plagiarism normalized conversations. The more we're talking about that, the more we can influence culture within our student population and change the attitude that they have with regards to it. So there's not that sort of rationalization that it's okay, it's acceptable behavior. So those are the 10 points. What I'll do now, I said I wanted to cruise through those quickly. Hopefully I cover them sufficiently. I'll stop